be if I said, you guys want me to preach or them to play? There's a real fun Marvel comic book and TV show that I like called What If? As a kid, I collected What If comics. And as a grandpa, I love watching the TV cartoon show with my grandsons, Charlie and Lincoln. The premise of the show is simple. It takes one of many Marvel stories, and Marvel is a line of comic books, in case you don't know. I think anybody not know that? John, you knew that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have. Marvel, the writers, it takes one of the Marvel storylines and allows writers to rethink the storyline under any kind of different circumstances or conditions that they might want. For example, and I'm selecting an example from a hero that we might all have heard of, what if Spider-Man had been a woman? Put differently, what if the radioactive spider that bit Spider-Man to give him his superpowers that reflected a spider, like climbing up walls and ceilings and possessing a disproportionate strength well above human strength, and gave him the ability to shoot webs, to create vine-like ropes upon which he could swing to go from place to place? What if these abilities had been given to a teenage girl still in high school? With this notion, various writers have imagined how this would play out in a young, nerdy young woman. The reason it was nerdy, typical nerdy young woman, the reason nerdy is because Peter Parker was nerdy. So they wanted to compare that. So she has these abilities, and she can't potentially use them without harming people, just as Spider-Man. However, in high school culture, a young woman may face sexual harassment, depression, anxiety. As a matter of fact, I read a study this week that anxiety and depression is doubled among teen girls than teen boys. Or maybe being overall unappreciated and often invisible to culture. For these are things young women face today, which she would suffer differently than Spider-Man in significant ways. Another writer dealt with the whole idea, what if Peter Parker wasn't the one bitten by a radioactive spider? What if the person who got bit was someone who didn't live by the mantra of, with great power comes great responsibility? What if that person was an egotistical bully whose only interest was taking care of himself? How would that play out in Spider-Man mythology? And so it goes with the what ifs. And what if is a great question for us to consider. What if on this Transfiguration Sunday, what if we took time to look seriously at the needs in our own lives and to face those needs? What if in Christ's Transfiguration we were able to gain different insights on God? Here's Matthew 17, 1 through 9, and if you care, it's also in your bulletin if you care to follow along. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. And Peter said, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I will build 3 shelters with 3 stone monuments, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. And they looked up, and they saw no one there now except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Well, what an epic event that would be in the life of the disciples. They were already followers of Jesus. They'd already respected him enough to be part of a mission to make the world a different place. They came with him with nothing and lived simply as they carried with Jesus the good news of God's love for all. And some saw Jesus glorified. Some of them, those 3 disciples, saw Jesus glorified, standing with Moses and Elijah. And to remind you, Moses was the carrier of the law, symbolic of that, which was essential in the lives of Jews. It carried God's plans for survival as well as worship. And while they were on the Exodus, and as a new forming nation, these laws helped keep them safe. The law was how Jews defined the world. The law was how Jews defined the world around them and their place in the world. And that tradition continues today. And Elijah, said to be the greatest prophet in Israel, he was the voice and the messenger of God in some of the darkest days of Jewish history. Days in which they rebelled and resisted God, looking for experiences in the nations that were considered to be unclean and filled with vice and greed. And as Jesus appears with these monumental figures in Jewish history, Peter seeks to frame all of this somehow to keep it together. And he says, hey, Jesus, this is really pretty cool. Why don't the boys and I take some rocks from around here and we'll build a monument for each one of you. However, the point of the transfiguration of Christ is not to build a monument to today or for today, but to establish with Christ plans for tomorrow. This is shown by the voice that comes from the illuminated cloud, the voice of God. God establishes Christ's place among the law and the prophets by recognizing Jesus amid Moses and Elijah. God says that Jesus is his son and his love, and that we would be wise to listen to him. The transfiguration of Jesus is not only about Jesus, but it's also about us. It instructs us. It guides us. It gives us hope. And most importantly, it gives us the opportunity to look at our lives through the lens of what if. This is the question that dreams are made of. My wife Kathy and I like to play what if, wondering what would we do if we hit the lottery. Step 1, we always joke, would be we need to buy a ticket. Which we rarely do unless it gets like $87 billion. And your odds are better then, right? But if we did hit it, what would we do with that money? What if? What if we hit the lotto? I had been asking what if as I was in the process with the search committee from this church, trying to decide if I should accept the gracious call that was offered. I was fully retired. I was doing whatever I wanted to do whenever I wanted. But man, was I bored. I wasn't having as much fun as I expected. I needed to be with people. I needed to be in ministry. My time pondering the what if led me to this place and this time. And I have to tell you, I am really digging it. Listening to Christ is a lifelong endeavor, one that is renewed daily. It will frequently cut against how we think things should be. In fact, we can find ourselves disagreeing with God at times about what we hear. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not unaccustomed to God's call to listen. Author Louis Menand, M-E-N-A-N-D, Louis Menand, wrote in the New Yorker the story of Martin Luther King's initial resistance to join the movement. Menand writes, Martin Luther King Jr. had no ambition to become the leader of a movement. When Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus line, King was a 26-year-old minister just 1 year into his new job at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. The legendary boycott that followed Parks' arrest was not King's idea, and when he was informed of it, he didn't endorse it. A mass meeting was called, however, basement and voted to call themselves the Montgomery Improvement Association. And then, to his surprise, and probably because he was not very well known, and no one else was eager to accept the risk of white reprisal, King was elected the group's president. It was after 6 o'clock in the evening. The mass meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock. King rushed home to tell his wife and to write a speech. The author continues, it normally took King 15 hours to write a sermon. He had now, for this message, 20 minutes to prepare. He said in his autobiography, King said in his autobiography, that he wasted the first 5 of those 20 minutes having a panic attack. 15 minutes later, he was picked up and driven to Holt Street Church. King's car ran into a traffic jam 5 blocks from the church, and he had to fight his way through the crowd to get inside. 5,000 or more blacks gathered in Montgomery to turn out for this meeting. 5,000. Nobody had any idea it would be like that. And at 7:30, after the singing of Onward Christian Soldiers, with no manuscript and a few notes, Dr. King got up to deliver one of the greatest speeches of his career. Martin Luther King Jr. asked the hard question. What if? What if? He counted the cost as the Bible recommends. He looked at his little church and wondered how this would impact their well-being as a congregation. He looked at the repercussions it could have upon his family. He looked at his own life and mission. And after it all, he consented to join a movement that is so important to American culture and well-being. What might you consider as a response to what if? Here are some I think about. What if we as a congregation decided that each one of us would invite one person a quarter to visit us in our sanctuary for a service? It's not and it's never been about getting more people into the pews, but I believe we have something to offer here. We have acceptance, inclusion, fellowship, and worship. So what if? What if we made a different decision about our contributing to the mission and expenses of First Congregational? I've never been a pastor who preaches or mentions money very much. However, the Bible does address that our treasure is where our heart is. Contributing is spiritual. It's Christ-like. It creates a connection. So what if? What if we took a new look at our presence in Ravenna? What if we saw our church mission and family in a new light? What if we impacted Ravenna in a new, positive, Christ-like manner? We've always done this in the past. It's been done currently. How can we extend that into the future? What if? And what if we asked more questions and sought new answers from God? I know this congregation to be dedicated to the praise and worship of God. I've seen that in all of my 67-year life in this church. This is where I was baptized. I was hung around here a long time. What if we asked God, what kind of presence could this church have, not just in our community, but in the world? Asking what if, questions might have some surprising new answers for us. They did for Dr. Francis Chen. He's the pastor of, I forget which church it is, but he wrote a book called Crazy Love, and found that asking the question, what if, totally changed his congregation and got him into deep, deep trouble with many of his parishioners. His church had dreamed and planned and financed to build an $11 million facility. They were growing. They had the excitement of a huge congregation who regularly participated in worship and in mission and in fellowship. The church was bursting at the seams and needed more room. And then Chen took a step back and he asked God, what if this isn't really what you want for us? And over time, he saw that God had an entirely different plan for that church. Despite the $11 million in the big expansion plan, Reverend Shen announced to his congregation that he could not go along with the massive building project. It was just too much money. There were too many hungry people in the world, too many needs. And he proposed a different plan that he felt he received from God. And together with his church leaders and the congregation, instead of building this huge building, they created many congregations all over the community to expand the message of Christ into a much larger geographic area. The God of today is renewed in our lives for the future in the transformational question of what if. Peter said, "What if we build a monument to you, Moses and Elijah?" God said, "That isn't the look I'm going for. I'm not interested in making this transfiguration event into something that focuses on now, today. I'm looking for how Christ is the vision for the future, every day from here to there." What if Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had ignored the call of God into Christian political activism? Our African American brothers and sisters would have been deprived of a lightning rod of change and vision. And so would have our whites and our Asians and our Latina congregations. So would our LGBTQ friends and our immigrants, our children, and so many other groups. He lived and he died with a dream of a different place for all of God's people in the world. And now as we move into this season of Lent, this journey of self-examination and seeking a deeper forgiveness, let us approach this time of personal enlightenment with a new what if. What if? What if we opened ourselves to God in a new way? What would be the response from God? May God expand and enhance our season as we experience Jesus